differently. The second thing that's happening is that the nature of demand is changing significantly as well. We all know, don't we, that the whole issue of crime and criminality is moving into the virtual environment, where we have all levels of criminality, from local antisocial behaviour through to international crime and international terrorism happening online, being planned online, being executed online, being perpetrated online. And that requires a whole different approach to looking after people's personal security. Because, of course, the virtual world knows no international barriers. It requires a lot of use of technology. It requires lots of thinking in terms of how people are experiencing crime in a way that they didn't previously do so. Years ago, you could stand with an audience like this and say, how many of you have been the victim of crime? And people scratch their heads thinking, have I ever been a house broken into, shed broken into? Has my car ever been attacked? And occasionally you get people putting their hands up and saying, yes, I've experienced that. Nowadays, when we ask people, have you been a victim of crime, people don't often think of those attempts to get into your money that happen online. People attempting to steal what you have in the same way. So people are experiencing criminality in a different way, which requires policing to think differently. The other big change that's happening in policing terms, in terms of demand, is a renewed and I think a very welcome focus on vulnerability. And there was an approach to policing that I grew up with, I dare say the Chief Constable grew up with, which was very much around targets and around reducing volume crime, burglaries, vehicle crime, those sorts of issues. And very often the success of leaders was assessed by if crime is down, if burglaries are low, if detection rates are up, you're doing a good job. But of course what happened there was that lots of people who were suffering often unreported crimes, or crimes that were reported to people other than the police. Very often people who were suffering from child sexual exploitation, domestic abuse, victims who didn't want to come forward and report hate crime. That those people were very often overlooked in a regime that put pressure on the police to look at those big number, high volume crimes. The focus very much has shifted towards vulnerability in policing, as far as I can see. I think that is welcome. But it requires a different approach to policing. It requires different skills, it requires different competencies on the part of staff who are undertaking. All of this change requires new types of leadership. I want to come on to say a little bit about that in a moment. So, these are the three headings that I want to share with you. These are the three areas of focus for the College of Policing, and I think this is the way in which we can best support change and transformation across policing. I should say at this point that the College of Policing has no statutory relationship with Northern Ireland. We do, of course, want a very close relationship with Northern Ireland. The Chief Constable will say something about that himself. But I think it is absolutely in the interest of the people of Northern Ireland that we have that close relationship. And it is absolutely in the interest of policing in England and Wales that we get the benefit of the experience of Northern Ireland as well. You have staff, officers and staff in Northern Ireland who have a tremendous amount to offer policing in England and Wales. And England and Wales would be the less for it if they were not part of that discussion. So let me talk about these three areas, and I'm going to focus principally on the third box, develops talent, skills and leadership, but a few words first about the other two. So share knowledge and good practice. At a time when money is too tight to mention, it's really important that leaders, policing leaders, leaders in other sectors, know what works. So that time, effort, money can be invested in things that have demonstrably been shown to be effective. And that requires building an evidence base. And policing, you might think, as a profession which does a lot around building and creating evidence, has not done a lot historically around creating the evidence base of what works, what's effective, what interventions are the best use of public money. And so the first thing that the College of Policing has been doing and will be doing in the future is helping to build that evidence base and be able to push that information out to police forces, to help leaders, to help people at all levels in policing make good decisions. So we need to be able to do two things. One, we need to be able to collect knowledge, and that's knowledge from operational people who are doing really good stuff. It's knowledge from academic institutions, it's from research bodies. We need to be the place that brings all of that knowledge into one place where the services can go to be able to get hold of it. So we're in the process now of thinking how we can best get hold of those good ideas. As I say, they might be big ideas that are the results of 5-year longitudinal studies in universities, or they might just be something that looks like it's working well locally. We need to be able to hoover all of that up. The second thing we need to be able to do is to push that information out then in a way which is accessible, meaningful, current, so there's people at all levels, again, operational people on the ground, right the way through to people who are making force-wide big decisions, have access to the very best information available. It's hugely important going forward that knowledge is available to people in a new way, and that evidence base is developed. What that also will do will be, and this has thwarted policing, I have to say, for as long as I've been involved in it, is to share good practice. There cannot be 40+ best ways of doing something. There is an opportunity through the College of Policing, through the sharing of knowledge, to be able to identify something that a force is doing really well and push it out there so that other forces can benefit from that. And sharing good practice, I have to say, is something which the service has not done well for many years. So we are looking to see how can we pick that good practice up and how we can make it available so people know where to go. One portal, one place to go, easily accessible, so that people are not looking all over the country. The second thing that the College of Policing is very proud to be responsible for is the setting of operational standards. These are standards which will apply across all police forces. And again, we will look to have discussions with Northern Ireland as to how PSNI will play into both standard setting, so that you are part of helping to create standards which are really good and solid and based on good experience, but also benefit from what those standards look like. So we need to build standards, not for everything. We've been there in the past where there's books and tomes and guidance and references for all sorts of different practices. We need to identify those areas of policing which would benefit from having a national standard. So we've just recently, as an example, launched neighbourhood policing standards. These are standards which have been developed with the benefits of practitioners at all levels on the ground, benefited from the academic research around what works, and put out there as standards which will help and inform chief officers in making good decisions about the neighbourhood policing provision in their forces. There are likely to be other standards going forward around investigation, around child protection, around domestic abuse. These are really important areas where the service would benefit from having a consistent approach as to what works. Too often, when I was an inspector of constabulary, I went to places, we're just talking about this, I was waiting for this meeting to start, around forces around the country saying, but we're different, we do things differently here. Well, that case for difference, I think, has to be right in the margins. The public, wherever they live, deserve the very best protection, and chief officers would benefit from one place where they can pick that good practice and those standards up from to assist in their decision making. The third area, and this is core business again for the college, but I think it's imperative to the future of reform across policing, is all about the people. Over 80% of the policing budget goes in people. Policing is a service that is delivered by people, officers and staff. It is hugely important that that really valuable resource in policing is invested in a way that has not happened to date. And when I say it's not happened to date, it's for this reason. The concept of continuous professional development, of investing in individual performance management, these are areas which are not traditionally areas of strength in policing. I led on inspections around legitimacy, and part of the whole legitimacy inspection was looking at how we develop staff. And this is an area for development across the service. Too often, staff development, has been expressed in policing as a cost rather than an investment. A lot of emphasis on how much this is costing, how much time people spend away from operational duties. It is correct to ask those questions, but it is also correct. The public deserve to have policing staff and officers who are well trained, who are current, who have the right equipment, who have the right approach, who are well recruited, who are told when they're doing a good job, they're challenged when they're not doing a good job. These are elementary elements of good people management, and too often are missing in some forces. So let me just talk about 4 areas that we will be looking at to enhance our approach to the workforce. Critical element, as I say, the whole issue of transformation. The first is the people who come into policing. This has proved to be a really controversial issue across England and Wales. It is dubbed in a lot of places that it is said in a lot of places that you will now need a degree to be a cop. That is not true. There will be, in the future, 3 ways of becoming a constable. And again, we're in talks with Northern Ireland to see how we can assist entry routes going forward here. One will be people who have one entry route, 2 entry routes will be for people who already have a degree. And they can either join as somebody who holds a policing degree, and they can come in and they'll do a shortened training program to equip them for putting that knowledge into practice as constables. There will be another entry route for people who have a degree in a subject other than policing, and that will be a transfer, if you like, to switch them into policing, to get the policing knowledge that they require, and again to become effective as practitioners. The third way is for people who do not have a degree, and the entry requirement will be exactly the same as it is now. And what we will be doing, we'll be training those people who don't have a degree. And because the role of a constable has changed so much, because it is complex, because we require so much from constables in terms of the levels at which they work, the levels of discretion that they have, the amounts of demand that they manage, they're often working in partnerships, leading partnerships. They're often having to make decisions quickly with very little information. We think that that is a complex, tricky job, and that they need proper development and proper training to do that. When you look at accrediting that training, the proper accreditation for it will be a degree. So constables coming in without a degree will be trained to meet the standards and the expectations that the public have of them. And at the end of that, when they're successful, they will be awarded a degree. I think that's great news for people coming into policing. I think it puts policing on a professional footing, and I think it actually matches the complexity of the role of constables as we see it now. So entry routes will change. New types of people coming into policing, new ways of developing people. The second challenge is around diversity. If we are to have a service that is effective in meeting the challenges of the future, then we always have to have a keen eye on how representative the service is of the communities it serves. This is a subject that many people in this room know and are very, very close to. It remains a challenge. It remains a challenge around minority ethnic recruitment, it remains a challenge around women, it remains a challenge around a number of different protected characteristics, but also remains a challenge in terms of bringing people in who think and work differently. Building up that diverse workforce for the enhancement of public safety. There's still a lot to do in this area. We still have significant groups of people who are underrepresented at all levels in policing. So there are still issues about how we bring people in and how people are progressed through policing. Third area is around leadership. None of what I've been talking about around reform and change and modernisation will happen without strong, effective, open, confident, optimistic leadership. And there are some fantastic police leaders across England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. I have had the pleasure of seeing and working with many of them. However, there is more to be done. We need to ensure that leaders are kept fresh, understand the challenges of the future. The whole issue of continuous professional development for senior people is important. And let's be really frank, and again this is a matter of public record, too few people are applying for the most senior jobs in policing. And that is to the detriment of policing. The policing board here, policing crime commissioners in England and Wales ought to have a really tough job when they are recruiting a chief constable. And they ought to have a tough job because there are so many good people wanting to do the job. Unfortunately, they do have a tough job recruiting chief constables, and that is because there are too few people applying for the roles. So we need to be thinking about how do we bring people through, how do we enhance people at all stages of policing and prepare them for the most senior roles in policing. I'm doing a piece of work at the moment looking at why it is that there are too few people putting themselves forward for the most senior roles. It's a complex picture, but we need a fix. So we will be developing a senior leadership hub in the College of Policing, which will assist with all of those processes. Again, I really want to work with the Northern Ireland Policing Board and with the Chief Officer team here to hook into what we can assist you with in ensuring that you have the very best people leading the police service of Northern Ireland. Final thoughts on well-being. It would be crass of a leader at a time of real austerity to go around and say, there are fewer people, everybody work harder. That is not the answer. But it is the job of a leader to optimise the contribution of everybody at work, so that people come to work, they're clear about what's expected of them. They know when they're doing a good job because they're told. They know when they're not doing a good job because they're told. They're physically, emotionally, mentally equipped for the complex role that's expected of them. When people think of well-being, traditionally in policing, they very often thought of welfare units. Well, kind of welfare units, occupational health units, as important as they are very often there when things have gone wrong. They're there for the officer who needs it because, or the member of staff, because they can no longer perform well in the job they're doing. They need a lot of support. They do fantastic work, but we need to be able to set up something that nearly makes those welfare units redundant. We want to have put things in place which looks at the well-being of officers and staff right from the moment that people start work as they progress through. There's lots of good stuff going on around well-being. There is an enthusiasm for well-being amongst police leadership that I've never seen before in policing. And this is very much around looking after the people who work for you, making sure that they are properly equipped to do the job. Because let's face it, policing can be tricky. It can be demanding, it can be dangerous, all of the things that we know, and it is incumbent on the leadership to make sure that well-being is properly catered for. I'm probably out of my time, but let me say this, that I think that we are in a period of change. The pace of change feels like it's something that I have not experienced before. We've gone through some years of change now. I hope that the job that I've got, the team that I lead in the College of Policing, can play a very important role in the landscape of change. It is for Chief Constables to lead change across policing, and they are taking up that mantle across forces. We need to be there to provide the very best support we can, and I look forward to the College of Policing being very engaged in the policing of Northern Ireland. Thanks for your time.
Mike, thank you very much for that very insightful presentation, and certainly I can imagine there'll be a lot of questions whenever you take to the panel. Before you do that, I would just like to invite the Chief Constable, George Hamilton, to address the seminar today just on PSNI plans for workforce modernisation and moving forward. Chief Constable.
Thank you, Amanda. Thanks. And thank you, Mike, as well. We do appreciate actually all of Mike's contribution to policing, both in his current role as Chief Executive of the College of Policing and indeed previously as the HMI that covered this organisation. In both roles, particularly in the former, he was challenging but very constructive, and that's a fine blend to make in terms of leadership and a positive contribution to making policing better. And I think it's helpful that actually he has moved on to this role of the College of Policing and all of the stuff that we've been hearing about. So, despite some of the differences geographically and legislatively, Mike made the point that we are not linked through legislation to the College of Policing, but it just makes sense actually that we exploit all of that good work that's going on in terms of collation of knowledge and what works and best practice and leadership and talent development, all of that. And so the approach that I am taking, or that we are taking as a senior team on behalf of the police service here, is that we will, subject to quality screening and applying local factors, but like Mike, I agree that any changes, any divergence from what's happening in neighbouring jurisdictions will be on the margins. It will be minimal. So our policy is one of adopt, and if not to adopt, then to adapt. So that means that we should not be too far away, subject to quality screening and local variances, but we will not be far away from what is seen as good practice and sensible standards, and being able to tap into the research and knowledge that has been collated through the College of Policing. So what are we doing, sort of was my brief, what are we doing to future-proof policing locally? You've heard the sort of the UK picture from Mike, and I think there's a desire to hear something from me about what we're doing locally to try to respond to the changes and challenges of the future. Well, we have developed a corporate plan that is really a roadmap for about the next 5 years under a number of headings that are consistent with what's happening in policing nationally. So there will be things like specialist capabilities, the development of a piece of work around that, a piece around partnership working, for example, and there are 7 of those categories that make up our corporate plan, and that is available to you as a public document. I don't really want to make this a presentation on the corporate plan, other than to say we have developed one and we're right on the cusp of taking that forward. It'll be organisational wide, but we've also restructured our chief officer portfolios to give Tim Mayers a responsibility for a portfolio called Innovation and Standards. So the work that Tim's doing will connect closely with our own police college here, and of course the professional body, the College of Policing, as represented by Mike here today. So those are probably the 2 big things that we're doing to get ourselves in a fit state for going forward into around about the next 5 years. And I want to talk a little bit about those, but before I do that, I believe that there are some important broad considerations for us to consider at the outset of our conversation. This might inform some of the discussion, some of the question and answer that will follow in about 10-15 minutes when I shut up and sit down and listen to you. The first one is something that I'm not going to say a great deal about because Mike has covered it very well, and that's about the changing complexity of policing. Here, we're no stranger to change and development and agility in policing. You just need to look back at Patton and all of that, and the massive transformation structurally, culturally, service delivery, just at about at every level. We're not strangers to change, but even since Patton, there has been massive change. I want to talk about that for a few moments. I want to talk about the need for a new model of public service delivery. So this is not about just policing, but it's about where policing fits in public service delivery. Policing is an important part of it, but despite our big egos, we need to realise that we're actually just one small part of public service delivery. I want to talk about that, and I want to talk as well about police legitimacy, the legitimacy of police actions and the police service. So the changing complexity of policing. I think in order to support the transformation of policing, we have to understand how society has evolved and the impact that is having on what society demands of the police. So demand has changed because society has changed. Conventional crime is reducing. It's on a downward trajectory. Those people who love to count the beans would be very pleased with us in performance terms because we're seeing recorded crime at a 10-year low, for example. It's sort of plateaued a bit, but there's no spike, there's no increase coming. We've seen over a 10-year period a downward trend in that. Every day we receive almost 1,500 calls for service, 1,437 to be exact, every single day. But only 16% of those relate to crime. That's perhaps a surprising figure. Just over 1 in every 3 of those calls for service relates to someone with an identified vulnerability. I was going to say more about vulnerability, but Mike has said lots of the key points, so I'm going to leave it at that. But 1 in 3 of our calls for service is anchored in or influenced by the individual's vulnerability. Since 2010, there has been a 120% increase in sexual offences involving children. Well, there probably hasn't been actually. What we've got is a 120% increase in recorded sexual offences involving children. That's a really important point to make because whatever the reason for the increase in reporting is a good thing. We can only address the harm, we can only tackle the vulnerability if we know that it's happening. So in the past, under those old-fashioned performance regimes, this would have been a critical incident, this would have been news headlines, this would be 120% increase in reported sex offending. Well, it's not actually. It is an increase in recording of sexual offending. That is it's a sad indictment of society, but I think it's just us getting a more accurate picture of where we're at. I'm not going to bore you entirely with figures, but needless to say, in the last 3 years, we have seen at least the bit that we can measure, it's probably bigger than this, but the measurable piece is a 112% increase in cyber-enabled or cyber-related crime. So, alongside that, we've got this challenge around all of those increasing complexities tend not to be placed by officers on the high street, in our housing estates, in high visibility jackets at 10 o'clock at night tackling antisocial behaviour. They tend to be needing to be researched in a back office space, in front of a computer terminal, in a suite that is properly developed to deal with victims and vulnerable people, maybe over a period of days to give them confidence in the officers and staff that they're engaging with. And there's this shift in police activity because the demand has changed. The shift is going from the visible police presence to invisible police activity. But it's critical to tackle the complexity of this changing demand. Alongside that, we've got budgets that are going only in one direction, and it's not upward. So we've seen massive budget reductions over the last number of years. I'm not going to go into all the details around that, just accept it, or if you want to know more, we can deal with it in the question and answer. And we've got this dilemma that is facing policing and police accountability right across the UK and Ireland, which is how do we meet public expectation, which is the same in some regards as it's always has been, or else increasing. That's a public expectation around visible policing, reassurance patrols, all of that, which is important. The public feel good when they see that generally. But we need to balance that against this demand that has shifted into this more complex, more labour intensive, less visible space. That's part of the problem we have. We also have some things that we had all hoped would be different. Patton, God bless him, and I'm a big advocate of the Patton report as a blueprint for policing. But it did not envisage that all of these years on, we would still be facing a severe threat from bad and distant Republicans. Patton was completely silent on the burden of the legacy of the past. I say a burden, I don't mean that disrespectfully to the victims. There are unresolved issues to do with our past that we are spending millions of pounds a year on that is not examining hard disks or dealing with child sexual exploitation or tackling domestic abuse. It's dealing with very serious crimes that either weren't properly investigated in the past or that there's unfinished investigations or at least unanswered questions for family. Patton was an advocate of the structures and the principles of Patton, was silent on the legacy issues as he was on the security situation. It wasn't quite silent on the security situation. He came up with 3 scenarios, and we're in the worst of those 3 scenarios, but he had sort of kept his fingers crossed and made recommendations and gave a view of the future that was very different to what we're actually facing with. And then, of course, I'm almost afraid to mention the B word, the Brexit word, but it's coming. We don't fully understand all of the implications of that because the negotiations aren't complete. We haven't been given the political direction and the working assumptions that we would have liked, so we're having to make up our own. We're doing that in good faith. We're trying to remain agile and flexible around all of that. But we do know, and this is not a political statement, it is widely accepted across policing and indeed across the EU that the removal of the EU justice tools will make the functioning of criminal justice across Europe much slower and much more cumbersome than it has been, especially over recent years as we've all got to work within the frameworks of the European justice machinery. So that's, if you like, why this is complex and why change is happening. The second piece is around this public service delivery model and where policing fits into that. Policing is only just one part of it. But we had, with enthusiastic joy, the draft programme for government that came forward, that some of us have been banging the table about for years. Matt Baggett, God bless him, he was going on about that collaborative working thing. Some of you might have remembered that. But this is about working across government departments, about working on an evidence base, about intervening early, about having an outcomes-based approach rather than a bean counting approach, all of that. And then about 2016, we got the draft programme for government that there seemed to be political consensus around, and many of us as public servants were greatly encouraged by all of that. But it remains in draft format, and politicians in the room, so I better be careful what to say. But actually, we don't have, we're going to get some heckling from John Dallett in the back room here. But we don't have the political leadership in place to give that programme for government the life that it deserves and to hold us in charge of public service delivery to account in a way that was envisaged in that draft programme for government that should be by now well beyond draft and become a living, shining example of good governance and good service delivery. So the Radar Centre is one example of that. There's a failure to deliver on that ambition, even though everybody's enthusiastic. So the Radar Centre is our safety centre I was going to say for young people, but we all would benefit from a walk through it. It's a fantastic facility just close by here in East Belfast. It has literally seen thousands of mostly young people through it. But we got to a point where it was no longer sustainable, both in public finance terms and in governance terms, and we didn't have the political cover to make some funding decisions around the renewal of a lease that would have tied us in for 5 years. Right? I'm just giving that as one working everyday example of why it's important that our politicians step up, resolve their differences, and get on with government. On the other hand, despite all the political bumps in the road, there are some really good shining examples of that cross-cutting, outcomes-based approach that is working. So within Belfast here, there's been it's across the jurisdiction, but it's manifesting itself in Belfast first with the custody facilities. So fantastic work going on in custody healthcare between the police service, partnership with Belfast Health and Social Care Trust, the Department of Health, the Department of Justice, and the Public Health Agency. That is an example of what can be achieved when we work together and don't get too excited about where the budget lines are. So most people coming into police custody are going to be vulnerable. They're going to have addiction problems. Many of them, I don't want to stereotype everybody who happens to get themselves arrested, but many will have addiction problems, will have mental health issues. And actually, if you just leave it to the cops, we're looking for evidence to prepare a prosecution file as quickly as possible before we get criticised, get it to the PPS and get them through court. That's not going to solve the problem for that individual with the mental health issue, with the vulnerability, with the addiction problem. We need to work together. We need to do our criminal justice bit. But at the same time, instead of just having an overly highly paid doctor getting employed to write a statement of evidence that is going to prove a criminal case, we actually need somebody that can do that and at the same time provide the service, the signposting to enable that citizen to get the help that we need so that we're all actually safer, including that citizen who happens to have found themselves arrested. Thirdly, the legitimacy point. The patent recommendations on accountability, on human rights, on diversity or representativeness have been the foundations of this organisation that I'm very pleased to lead. They remain as relevant today, perhaps more so than they were when the recommendations were made. And no matter what the change or the challenge or the complexity, in the future, those foundations won't change. We need to be legitimate. That is, we need to have a human rights framework. We can call it whatever we want, but actually those principles of operating within the law, necessity, proportionality, being held to account, having an audit trail of our decisions, being proud to stand behind our decisions are really important for good, legitimate policing. An organisation that is held to account when it's operating through the policing board here, for example, through the police ombudsman and the other infrastructure of patent is all good, healthy stuff. But our journey on all of these fronts is still not complete. I'm proud of what we've achieved in terms of the human rights-based thinking. We don't hardly even need to have it as an agenda item now in some of our internal meetings because people use the language. It's how we live and breathe. It's in our DNA, but we're not complacent. We always appreciated, for example, the annual health check that one of the board committees presented on human rights compliance within the police service. It was part of the accountability mechanism. We have missed that actually for the last year and a half. It gives us an opportunity to proudly showcase some of the progress that we've made, but there's also really constructive challenge in it, and we saw it as an annual health check on human rights compliance. And that brings me to accountability. 600 days or more without a properly constituted policing board, and that has a significant impact on policing, on senior appointments, on advocacy for policing when we deserve it, on challenge to policing, criticism of policing when we deserve it, advocacy for things like Brexit, advocacy for an inclusive, diverse approach to police recruitment. A policing board would be really handy for me to have just now as we navigate our way through all of those. And maybe there are aspects of the policing board that are in need of revisit or reform. I don't get too excited about that. If that needs to happen, then let it happen, but let not the need for any review or reform get in the way of it being re-established. Finally, the representativeness issue. For a police service anywhere in the world to have the confidence and the consent to be legitimate, it needs to be representative, or at least seek to be representative of the community that it serves across all the strands of diversity: gender, ethnicity, community background, sexual orientation, and so on. An independent and carefully designed recruitment campaign is just one of the many steps that we have taken to try to make ourselves more representative and not to lose ground on the representativeness and of the inclusion of our workforce. But we can't deliver that in isolation, and we need the support of civic and political leadership in that quest. The launch of our recent recruitment campaign, which just closed on Friday past, by the way, there was a public debate emerged on the issue of 50-50 recruitment, which we had for 10 years, of course, and that was stimulated by the fact that Catholic representation in the police service is in danger of stalling or even slipping backward. That is a concern to me, and I know it's a concern for the policing board. We see representativeness as an issue that calls for a rational, informed, brave and courageous public discussion. We need to address this issue before the numbers start going in the wrong direction. There's no point waiting until that happens. We need to be having that discussion now. And we're asking for support from right across the political and civic spectrum in addressing this challenge. And I hope that this will be an issue that we can take forward with the newly constituted policing board. If all the stars line up, we're hoping to have that in December or January, as soon as it's practically possible. So there's something then, those are sort of the three very big points about the reason why we need to change and a little bit of what we're doing about it. But there is something about just making the transformation happen. And that's where our corporate plan has come in, which you're welcome to a copy of, and we're happy to take questions on. And also this focus at a chief officer level for all of us in leading the organisation, but in particular the portfolio that Tim Mears has around innovation and standards. The corporate plan itself, I commissioned this towards the end of 2017, and the whole idea was to what more do we need to do in the journey, in the next stage of the journey, to fulfill our vision of helping to build a more confident, safe and peaceful society. And we consulted with the policing board, or what was left of it, and with other partners, and the result, I think, is a useful document that gives us a roadmap for going forward. It's about understanding our future operating environment as best as we can, and also some of those significant challenges as I've identified to you earlier. So it's my hope that this corporate plan not only sets the direction of travel for the organisation over the next 5 years, but it also creates a clear case to stakeholders in government and policing board and so on that will be persuasive in investing in transformation, investing in innovation. The PSNI needs to become more agile, more adaptable, a more sustainable organisation, and I believe that the corporate plan is the bedrock to convince other people that this organisation has the leadership and has the plan to deliver on all of that. And it also has at its heart that notion is completely compliant with the programme for government. We know that there's large chunks of this that we can't do on our own. We don't actually want to do on our own. There's other people within public service delivery better equipped to deliver some things that currently fall to policing. And just finally, we're have an ongoing consultation, and Anne and Amanda mentioned this earlier, on what the sort of shop window of policing looks like, the district policing, local policing review, and that consultation is well underway, and many of you will be engaged in that. I'm not going to say too much more about it, but we're trying to show through that we want to listen to people, We know that policing is too important to be left to the police alone, and we want to be responsive to what people need. But part of the consultation is actually raising awareness. All those wicked problems that I identified about how policing complexity is changing, and it's becoming less visible activity to the average citizen out in the street looking for the traditional yellow jacket on the high street or in our housing estates. Part of this consultation is about informing the public without being patronising, about explaining to people the dilemmas that we have, and I think the priority simulator is a very effective way of doing that. So if you haven't done it, please get on the Policing Board website or the PSNI website, get the link to the priority simulator and give us the benefit of your wisdom around how we should prioritise our ever-shrinking resources. So I'm not going to say much more to here. We'll engage in some Q&A. Hopefully, we do need an executive back up and functioning. That would be really helpful. Looking forward to the board. I never thought I'd hear myself say this, but we have missed the Policing Board. The platform that it gives, the edge that it gives the organisation, when you know that you're going to be held to account, you behave in a way that you can be proud of, frankly. I say that to new recruits coming into the organisation, and I say it to myself and the Chief Officer team. Accountability is really good for policing, even if it is uncomfortable at times. So the reconstitution of the Policing Board, hopefully in the next month or two, is something that we welcome. And the thing that gives me the greatest confidence when I look to the future is actually the sheer quality of the staff and officers that make up this organisation. I hold them in high esteem, in high regard, and of course we make mistakes. Policing is a human endeavour. There will be times when we get it wrong. There will be the odd piece of mad behaviour from the odd person within our organisation. But generally speaking, 99.9% of the time, people turn up as a police officer or a police staff member to do a good job, and I'm very proud of the contribution that they make, and more is being expected of people as budgets shrink and numbers fall. But on that note, I'm going to finish there. I think I sit over here, is that right? And take the incoming. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. We're just getting more water, but we'll get some brought up here. I'm just going to open straight to questions because I'm conscious of time and there's lots of people in the room. So if we have anybody looking to ask a question, if you could just indicate to me now. As always happens. I'll take one from Barbara in a minute. Have we got our open mic? Yes, and we've another question then over here.
Hi, I have a question around the three different entry points that you were talking about, and you were stressing the fact that there isn't a need to have a degree to get into policing. I take it from that you realise that there's a value in people that come through other ways. How does that tally with people thinking that the best people are also always the people with degrees, so that even if practically it says, well, you need 5 O-levels or whatever to get in, that in practice there is a possibility that feeds through into only people with a degree will actually even start out on that. So how do you overcome that people with a lot of common sense and knowing how to work with people in certain situations and having other qualities that make it through?
Yes, it's a very good question, and it's one that we're keeping a very close eye on. The early indications are that's not happening for the early adopter forces. A piece of research that's been undertaken in the Metropolitan Police has indicated that the new entry routes are very attractive to potential applicants, including those who don't have degrees. The whole issue of apprenticeships in terms of supporting social mobility is an important element of what we are hoping to achieve out of this. We do want, policing needs people, as George was saying in his piece about diversity. Policing needs people from all backgrounds and many. And so we are keeping a very close eye in terms of implementation, that challenge won't happen. The entry routes, we are emphasising the fact that the entry requirements haven't changed, and that the degree at the end of the training is more a reflection on the level of training that people are going to get, rather than an expectation. What we don't want to sell this out as, we don't want to go into the housing estate saying, come and join the cops, you're going to get a degree. It's come and join the cops, you will be trained, you will be out there serving your communities. The byproduct of that training will be a degree qualification at Londoners. But I think it's a fair question, and it's one that as we implement this going forward, we keep very close in terms of monitoring the pilots.
Chief Constable, maybe you could just comment in terms of at the start you said we didn't adopt, you would adopt. Is this one of the areas that you plan to adopt or adopt?
Yeah, no, we're going to adapt this slightly because we already have actually a lower threshold of education qualification than even England on Wales already, with our 5 GCSEs, 2 of which must be English and Maths. So and what we want to do is we're trying to be as representative as we can, not just in terms of the community background piece, but right across working class areas, and we want all parts geographically of the jurisdiction to be represented. So we think that we can find a way of adapting on this one where we effectively get to the same end point as Mike has been outlining that will happen in the rest of the UK, but we will have a slightly different approach. There's also, we're being slightly penalised in this as well because the non-degree entry mechanism across the rest of the UK is through the apprenticeship scheme. So, as a big public sector organisation here, we get the pleasure of paying the apprenticeship levy, but we don't have an apprenticeship scheme because, well, it's a devolved matter and we don't have a devolved administration, and it's not something that Westminster and Whitehall are going to intervene in because it's down to local politicians if they wanted to develop an apprenticeship incentive. So, although we're going in the same route, and in some ways we're actually a bit ahead of England and Wales because at the moment we bring people in as student officers, we train them over 6 months, or 23 weeks. They end up at the end of that with a level 5 qualification in policing, which is just one notch down from the degree. If you could call it a level 6, it would be a degree. So we're already, and it's only at that point when people have successfully accredited themselves to that level that we attest them as constables. And our plan would be that we would continue with that model, so people would come in, that initial training course we were always up to develop it and to change it, but effectively at the outcome of that people will have their level 5 qualification. During the 2 years and possibly 3 years of their probation, they will have the opportunity to do additional modules that again are simply accrediting them for the work that they're doing around problem solving, the complexity of their role, the partnership working, all of that, so that they can have the recognition, the accreditation for that good work. So it's slightly different, but we're sort of on a parallel track, and we're going to end up at the same point, that by the time people have got to 2 or 3 years service and they're fully confirmed as a police officer, they will effectively have the competence, the skills, the training recognised by the awarding of the degree. But it's not a case of you need a degree to do the job, please.
Okay, thank you. We have a question here just, and then we have another one in the middle after that.
Hi, it's Charmaine Jones from Rural Community Network. This is a question for George. I work for an organisation where the number one issue with policing is the invisibility of police, and that's a perception that rural communities would have. And I suppose outside of larger towns and cities, it's harder for the police to spread themselves even thinner into more rural areas. But from today and from your discussion and talking about the sort of the changes in policing, and the new models of service delivery, I can see now why you've become less visible and where your focus now has had to be. So how can you get the message out to rural communities that police has changed, get the message out there that you're dealing with different issues? So the old style of policing, I think, very much lives in the minds of rural areas, and you have to sort of bring them up to speed with this new changes. And I would encourage your organisation to use our organisation as a mechanism to do that in the future, because rural communities very much are thinking police of 15, 20 years ago and not now.
Yeah, well, I think it's a very good challenge. For us, there is something about us as a public service. We have been so focused on reassurance that I was a journalist in the room. This is going to be a headline, I know, but I'm going to say it anyway. We've been so focused on reassurance that we haven't always been entirely honest. So we don't want to do the criminal, the organised criminal, the paramilitary groups work for them by saying how difficult it's all going to be, and we're busy indoors processing computer examinations or dealing with other complex issues. There needs to be a bit of honesty, and there needs to be a bit of us raising awareness without telling the public what they think. So part of this ongoing consultation, and the reason why we've got this priority simulator that people can link into through a web link, is we're trying to get people to understand that there's all of these things in policing that need to be done, and how much emphasis do you want to give to each individual area. Now, there is something about living in isolated rural communities, and this is the bit where Mike and I very politely and constructively sometimes disagree with his previous role, because if I put resource only to demand and to risk, I probably wouldn't have any rural police stations open at all, because so little happens. There's a better, stronger sense of community very often in rural communities where they look out for each other. And harnessing all of that goodwill and the low crime levels, you would actually put all the police into the larger, more urbanized areas. But we're clearly not going to do that, because even though the demand profiling may not justify it to HMIC or to the audit office or whatever, I know that in public confidence terms, it still makes sense to have a police presence there. But I'm not going to pretend that we can have the same police presence there with 6,500 officers as to what we had when we had 38% more just 7 years ago. So there needs to be a mixture of forthrightness, of honesty, without creating fear and panic, and that's the constant balance that we're having. We're just reconfiguring now through this consultation local policing. So your views need to be fed into that. We need to hear that. And even when we had our last go at developing an operating model brought about by the Review of Public Administration, so we had less council areas and we wanted to make sure policing was still coterminous with it. Even whenever we did that, in fact Stephen led on this for us at the time, we actually made quite a subjective professional judgment about where neighbourhood policing teams were going to be, because we were moving away from a model where every square foot of Northern Ireland had its own neighbourhood policing team, to going to where they were needed. So the high crime areas, the areas that were susceptible to paramilitary activity, that if we didn't take the space, the paramilitaries and the organised criminals would. There's all of that, and we had pretty good intelligence and data to base that on. But there was another criteria that Stephen applied on our behalf, which was rural isolation. So therefore, now the jam might be spread too thin for all of us, and it mightn't be as visible as it once was, and we would all like more. But actually, that sort of isolation feeling and that feeling of we don't want the community to feel that way. So this is all about juggling and prioritising and taking a bit of risk and trying to put the resource to where the demand is, but also at times reassurance is not a bad thing to be doing.
Chief Constable, we have a question just in the middle here.
Hello, this is just a comment from Mike and a question for George. Mike Brown, Foyle Women's Aid. Mike, I really love to hear your presentation, and I welcome the fact that you talked about domestic violence as something that didn't meet targets, and I've been, across the region, have been saying that for years, because you're not going to see those crimes and targets. And in fact, Monica McWilliams' latest research is saying that only 4 out of 10 victims are coming forward and reporting. So I'm really interested in your portal. Is that only for the police to go into about models of best practice?
At the moment, it is for police, but I'm looking at ways in which George mentioned earlier on that we need to be thinking of how policing fits into the much broader sector, and so I want it open to all professionals to be able to access that. So it either is now or will be very shortly open. I was asking for the switch to be made for instance, imminently.
I suppose then the question for George is domestic violence and sexual violence still on the increase, and are there new plans about resourcing and looking at targets in there, not targets but targets within the police to look at improving all of that, because it's still a major issue and it's going higher each year, and if we look back in the last 5 years we're working with more, so it's about making, I suppose the question I'm asking, is that being taken seriously?
Well, I would say yes, but of course I would say yes. So let me give you some evidence to that. And the work that you do in Women's Aid is a huge support, not just for the women, but actually joined up service delivery, the very stuff I was talking about, and we don't take that for granted, we appreciate it. But look, over all the years of cuts in policing, so we had some very rich years post-patent when there was extra money available to do certain things and help the organisation transform. But pretty much for the last decade, year on year, budgets have been reducing. We're not moaning about that too much because it's the same right across the public sector. So we have to be clever in what we do. The easy thing to do, and the default thing, would have been, and we did some of this. I did some of this. We would say things like everybody will have to take a 6% cut next year, and that sort of idea of salami slicing everything. And then we went through a phase of, well, this is getting really bad, so we must protect police officer numbers at all costs, so strip out everything else. So a lot of the police staff functions, for example, we didn't actually make anybody redundant, did some voluntary exit, and a lot of posts went unfilled. And then what you get is the whole organisation starts to crumble. So you don't invest in IT, in human resources, in training, in quality assurance, in governance. It's okay for a wee while, and then the cracks start to appear. So we have identified 3 or 4 areas, 3 that are sort of externally focused and 1 internally focused, that we're going to try to do the clever thing, which is, once the money reduces and numbers overall fall, we're going to have 4 areas that we will protect or grow. And the 3 of those, you'll not be surprised to hear. 1 is our cyber capabilities, another is public protection, and in that I mean your world, serious sexual offending, safeguarding of children and adults, domestic abuse, the full range of public protection is going to be an area of protection and probably growth. The 3rd area is going to be critical neighbourhoods, which is what the current review of district policing and local policing is about. And then the 4th area is one which is one of Mike's boxes around the priorities to the College of Policing, which is around well-being. So we want to be investing in our people in the broadest sense of well-being, everything from developing talent to allowing them to deal with the issues and the trauma that they face at work and all the rest of it. So there's those sort of 4 areas: cyber, public protection, critical neighbourhoods, and our people really are the 4 areas that we're going to protect and grow. That will mean other areas will need to take more of a hit, frankly, but I'm trying to convince you that in answer to your question, that we have invested heavily, we've created a public protection branch. I had their recognition event last Thursday night when there was over 100 people across the organisation being recognised for the work that they do. And some of the stuff that those people do in terms of child protection, child abuse investigations, domestic abuse, I wouldn't have the personal resilience to deal with what some of those constables and sergeants are dealing with. So we actually celebrated, probably the wrong word in that world, but we recognised, better word, the massive contribution they make to keeping people safe in that whole space of public protection. So it's right up there as one of the sort of key assumptions for us going forward, that we need to protect, if not grow, that area of work.
So the last comment for politicians in the room. Coercive control legislation, big disappointment, big failure to women and children in Northern Ireland that that's not going through, because when you work with that, you can stop, you can prevent at the more serious. It's a big failure to Northern Ireland women, but we didn't have that, and hopefully that will come through.
And it is one of the examples I would cite regularly with things that we're waiting on, that there's cross-party consensus on, but we don't have a minister or an assembly to make it happen. So.
It's not here, it's not working.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks, Mary. We have a question just down here, Claire, and then this gentleman as well. Follow that.
Thank you, Claire Bailey, MLA. And thanks for both presentations. My question is really following on from what Mary has already raised. Am I right in saying that you, George, said that there's a 120% increase in reported sex crimes? Is that figure right?
Yeah.
That's pretty phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
And while that's great that I think the work, and I would echo what you said there in terms of the border protection team and the work that they do take and the dedication, and there's only so much a human being can take in that line of work, and I do completely understand that. With a 120% increase in sex crimes, with reduced budgets, it's good to hear that you are prioritising that, but I know that PPS also released their figures recently, and while there was a huge increase in cases that they were dealing with, I don't think it was 120% up. I know that annual figures are hard to, the statistics are hard to compare in a similar year, but we also see that there was a decrease in conviction rates. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on why that is, or how it can be made better.
Yeah, well, I mean, so this actually links to the good work that goes on in the College of Policing. So, first of all, we have to deal with the evidence that is available, but the really clever bit is making sure that we harvest the evidence that is actually available, that we have people that are properly trained and equipped to gather the evidence, to process it, and to get cases well presented to the PPS to increase the chances of prosecution and conviction. But the private nature of a lot of this offending is that the evidence isn't just as straightforward as if your house is burgled sort of thing, so it's a more difficult starting point. That's not an excuse, but we have specific accreditation and investigative training now for people dealing with serious sexual offending, both on adults and children. We've got better training than we have ever had, and accreditation and continuous professional development for people involved in safeguarding both children and adults. And the investment, I think, is still starting to work its way through. So Sir John Gillen, the former High Court judge, is doing a review commissioned by the Criminal Justice Board that I sit on. And I don't want to see this thunder or anything, but I'm expecting him to talk in his findings about the quality of some of the evidence gathering, for example, the training, the recognition of people involved in that whole world of sexual offending, child abuse, domestic abuse, and so on. And we'll not be disagreeing with any of those findings, but we do have in place measures through training, accreditation, investment to try to improve. Frankly, it's not. You're not going to get any defensiveness from me. What you'll get, hopefully, is some assurance that we're listening, that we want to do this better.
I might just say, in terms of the national context, that the percentage increases that George is talking about for Northern Ireland are being seen across police forces. And I think you mentioned in your presentation, George, that the increase in reporting, and I would absolutely endorse this point, the increase in reporting has to be a welcome development, where victims are prepared to come forward. And there is evidence of this now. Victims are more willing to come forward and report crimes. We know, and we open up paper every day, we know that the incidence of these crimes was very, very significant in days and years gone by, but simply people were not reporting it. And sometimes people were reporting it and they weren't properly listened to.
Thanks, Daniel Wallace, EJ Human Rights Group. Just first of all, just to welcome some of the things George said about the importance of accountability in human rights compliance framework. I think that's very important and important to bring it up every sort of stage. I suppose in our experience, some of the accountability mechanisms that have been brought in, if they're not expressly safeguarded in legislation, are vulnerable to either resistance or rollback at some stage, and that does concern us. And George, you come up with the specific example of the annual human rights health check that was held up, not just on these islands, but internationally as a good practice model.
Yeah.
And I suppose from our perspective, it would be helpful to have that expressly reflected in legislation, so it can't just be pulled away. And wondering from the services perspective, having that type of thing expressly provided for us as a permanent accountability mechanism, would that be something that's helpful from your perspective? Second, as you mentioned, the 50-50 recruitment, and we would certainly support that type of call for reasoned and rational debate on this. I mean, the equality law, human rights compliance is very clear there, and I think any temporary special measure that's designed to tackle an existing underrepresentation is not discrimination, and in fact works against discrimination. We should be able to have that type of debate in the 21st century. And on that subject as well, just to throw something over to Mike, in terms of your work on diversity, that type of area, and particularly in providing advice here, to what extent would you sort of Northern Ireland proof any advice that was given to the different levels of equality law here? We have just had a situation, and I assume Home Office's Border Force isn't actually one of your customers by statute, whereby every post-Brexit recruitment exercise they have run here has had to be held up and stopped because it was done so badly and so incompatibly with our own equality laws. It just didn't seem to have been thought through when they were stood up and they'd not made a single appointment on the back of it. Thank you.
Chief Constable, would you like to go first?
Well, I was, the policing board have a statutory obligation around monitoring us for human rights compliance. So therefore, I have always considered the annual report to be a statutory requirement. Now, I'm not saying there's an acting section that mentions an annual report. There might actually be, I don't know, but we assumed that this was non-negotiable. And so if somebody wanted to put that in as an addendum to the legislation, there would be no objection from us to the police service, because we certainly currently value that annual health check in a way that there be no resistance. Now, nor should it be, I suppose the benefit of putting these things in the legislation is that I'm 100% convinced that me and I see my team are absolutely bought into engaging with that process, and I don't think you will have heard in recent years at least any resistance from the senior end of this organisation, even when we're having to read stuff that's uncomfortable about ourselves, because it's a healthy good thing to do. But if it's not in legislation, certainly the board's duty to monitor human rights compliance of the police service is. So to me, it's a bit of a good point of whether the actual provision for the annual report is legislation or not. But nor would I resist it if it gave people confidence in policing and therefore enhanced our legitimacy, then I'm up for that, certainly.
With regard to Northern Ireland proofing advice, no, absolutely. If we're going to engage with Northern Ireland in the way that George and I have ambitions for that level of engagement, then we have to make sure that the work that we do fits with the Northern Ireland context. The good news on that is that the work is funneled through our own governance machinery, which includes a professional committee which looks at all of the advice and guidance, and George sits on that. And so we, as part of the ongoing engagement with Northern Ireland, we want to make sure that we're shaping stuff that will fit our local context.
Just picking up on Daniel's point in relation to 50-50 recruitment, and the broader point around representativeness. Mike, you mentioned in your presentation the whole area of diversity and maybe you could just expand on that, because you did all through your presentation talk about policing changing and a renewed focus on different skills and competencies and different approaches. Could you maybe just comment on that a little bit?
I mean, I have to say that I don't think, I can't envisage the challenge of diversity ever being far away from policing. This gets right to the very fundamental principle of the policing model, which is about policing with legitimacy and policing in a way that communities appreciate, trust, have confidence in. And so there's not a nice to have. It's not something which is on the periphery of policing. It is right front and centre into the core of the policing model. And so if there are any issues of diversity, any issues of representation, which challenge the concept of legitimacy, it kind of begins to corrode that relationship of trust and confidence that needs to be in place for effective policing. You know, I'm talking to an informed and experienced audience around this. We are talking about very, very fundamental issues in relation to how policing works. And so I think that policing leadership continues to need to think very carefully about this. We need the challenge, we need to think about legislative options, we need to think about where we can take and be ambitious around the whole area of diversity and continue to push the agenda, because the reality is that we have not yet been able to succeed in some of the areas of diversity in anywhere near the way that is required. That remains a challenge.
Thanks, Mike. Chief Constable, and perhaps going to put you on the spot a wee bit. You did bring this up in your presentation, but you did talk about the recruitment campaign when it closed on Friday. Are you in a position to give any headline figures from that?
Yeah, well, we had, I suppose, the positive headline is there's still lots of people that want to be police officers, which is not a bad thing. So we had 6,200 plus applicants in the Friday for the cut-off time. We had 30.5% of those were from the Catholic community. 37.5% of the applicants were female, and 2% were from identified as ethnic minorities. So, could do better, I suppose, is the overall assessment, but actually Nora was seeing a significant step backwards, seeing a very marginal decline in Catholic representativeness of, forgive me, the figures are all still been ratified and so on, but I think it's at 1% down on the last competition. But of course the real trick is we want to attract as many underrepresented, or as many people from underrepresented groups as possible, but we also want to see that follow through into actual appointment. So there's been a particular challenge with people coming from the Catholic communities, but in around 30%, that's a pretty constant figure, so it's not much change. But a 30% application rate, but low 20%, 22% I think, in terms of actual appointment. So that indicates there's a greater attrition rate through the process when people come from the Catholic community. We take this very seriously. We've commissioned lots of work around obstacles and barriers to recruitment. We want to work with people to try to make ourselves truly representative. But you know, we still have a pretty vibrant labour market out there, and 6,250 people wanting to join the police service, and not as diverse as we would like it, not as representative as we would like it, but certainly better than it has been in the past.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take the last question from John Topping at the back of the room.
Thanks, John Topping from Queen's, and also Chairperson of Community Restorative Justice Ireland. Many thanks, Mike and George, for the insight. It's probably some of the most advanced transformational expertise anywhere in this room today. I think one of the reasons to see the consensus is that the complexity of society is certainly, in terms of policing, is greater than any one organisation. George, I know you alluded to a third of the calls are related to vulnerability, but I'm just wondering about transformation, how bold can we be? And I give an example that we had at Queen's Bill Evans, former Boston police commissioner, in last week, who said they had, just before he left, they had started to bring social workers into the custody suites. We have some of the most advanced restorative justice bodies in Western Europe. In Northern Ireland, I just wonder where that balance lies between incremental change to the organisation and bold experiments that at least we can say we've tried in order to be able to try and get policing to adapt to the world around it.
Well, I was just going to reflect on the social workers in custody officers. That is not something that is unfamiliar. We see now regularly police officers working cheek by jowl with other parts of the public sector, voluntary sector. We see mental health professionals being deployed alongside police officers in forces, mental health workers working in custody suites. We see officers working alongside, co-located, jointly managed with social workers and health professionals in multi-agency safeguarding hubs. This has to be about the whole sector looking at joint outcomes around people being healthier, safer, better educated, more profitable, etc. And specifically, one of the areas that we look at is in terms of developing people and leadership development, which I've alluded to. I see the case for police-specific training diminishing by the day. And I think that there will always be a place for training police officers in firearms and public order, you know, the kind of the technical bits of being a police officer. But I think a lot of leadership development that police officers have to do has to be alongside the people with whom they work. Policing is part of a much broader system, and it is de rigueur for police officers and staff at every level now to be working alongside fellow professionals from other agencies and working on joint outcomes to better protect people going forward. So I think that has to be the level of ambition, looking at the system as a whole rather than just the policing profession.
I think there's movement that direction, tangible movement that direction, and I did refer, we could do a whole session on the sort of interface between criminal justice and healthcare, but the work that we're doing, well, right across the jurisdiction, particularly at Belfast, around nurse-led practitioners in custody suites. We have mental health specialists in the custody suite. We've got community psychiatric nurses at where the